Disengagement is a novel of intertwining perspectives that tells the story of the evacuation of a fictional settlement in Gaza from the perspective of lots of different people from all across the religious and political spectrum. The disengagement from Gaza was a real event that happened in 2005. At the time, I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school. I did attend a religious school that identified with the settler movement. So I came at it from a sympathetic perspective because of that. And at home, my dad supported the disengagement and my mom opposed it. I think I would officially have said that I opposed the disengagement at the time, but I always felt a little torn about it. When the day actually came, I spent it locked up in my room. I refused to watch any of the footage. I just couldn't deal with the emotional intensity of it all. It was just too painful. About a year later, I found myself writing a short story about a female soldier who has to evacuate a widow who lives in a settlement in Gush Katif. I kind of based it on impressions that I'd had and ideas that I'd heard about what the disengagement was like. Years later, when I was focusing more on writing short fiction, I decided to revisit that story and decided, okay, I need to do some real research this time. So I sat myself down and watched 3 consecutive hours of footage from Gush Katif. I emerged from it feeling that I just didn't have the capacity to decide what perspective to represent. I found myself having conflicting voices rising up in me about it, and who did I really support and who did I not support and who was I critical of. And I felt I couldn't write this story. And I think it was actually my husband who said, well, you don't have to choose one. Maybe you could write a story for each one. That's what I did. I started writing a collection of short stories, and that eventually grew into this novel. As expected, after a few minutes of small talk, she started yammering to me about her life in Gaza. She rattled on and on about how much they had sacrificed to live there and how they'd been treated like second-class citizens with unreliable electricity and far away from the nearest commodities, living on the front lines to protect us all from the Palestinians, blah, blah, blah. The self-righteousness was sickening. And then Edna, get this, she told me the name of the settlement where she lived. Neve Adva. The same Neve Adva where Penny was stabbed, trying to protect a settler. You don't know anything about sacrifice, I told her. My son died protecting you and the rest of your little settler friends down there in Neve Adva. The look on her face, Edna, it was priceless. She was talking to me about sacrifices. Does she have any idea what it feels like to wake in the middle of the night and just know that your favorite son is gone and to lie there awake, afraid to move to confirm your prediction until the knock comes at the door? I started to cry because, well, you know me, I can't talk about Penny without crying, and she started to cry too, and when I was done talking, she just sat there staring at the floor for a long time. I have no idea how it had never occurred to her that other people had made sacrifices for her to be there too. Did she think none of us paid taxes? That it didn't cost millions to maintain a military presence in Gaza? That it didn't cost lives, not only of settlers, but of soldiers, little boys who never volunteered to be out there like she did? So I said all this while she sat there silently. I don't know how much she heard or understood, but after a while she got up and thanked me and left without another word. Who knows? Maybe I got through to her. Next I should tell her why she needs to stop having so many kids. So on the one hand, we have the main character who sort of comes into this relationship with her new neighbor with a preconception about what settlers are. And on the other hand, we also have the settler neighbor, Naama, who also kind of came into this relationship with a preconception. It really seems not to have occurred to her that this woman had made this kind of sacrifice for her to live there. I think that conversation that they have is pivotal. It's the moment where they choose to sit down and talk to each other and listen to each other's stories. Afterwards, we start to see that Khedva's concept of who Naama is and who these neighbors are starts to change also. If there's nothing else that anyone gets out of this book, I really hope that it is the importance of listening to each other's stories. There's so much we can learn from listening, and not just learn, but also the connection that we create when we are willing to listen is something that can't be created by just shouting at each other. One of the things that I saw during the disengagement, and still see today a lot in politics, is the difficulty people have with sitting down and listening to each other and listening to each other's stories. There was a lot of sort of talking past each other. They sort of talked within their own terms and their own frame of reference without really thinking about what the other side was thinking. What are they concerned about? There was this really painful rift in Israeli society because of this, because people weren't willing to really listen to each other. For weeks, maybe months, Livana came into Olga's room in the middle of the night, whimpering about nightmares with bad guys and bombs trying to kill her. After Olga would calm her, she refused to go back to her bed, sobbing that she was afraid the nightmares would come back. Olga would shush her and stroke her hair, and then lie awake long after her child's body became heavy and her breath slow and rhythmic. She would hold Livana tight, helpless against the tears dripping onto her pillow, because she could neither promise her daughter that the nightmares wouldn't return, nor that they wouldn't come true. Yossi was smiling. Rabbi Shlomo scrutinized him through narrow eyes. Why are you so happy all of a sudden? This is where the redemption starts. God will hear our prayers. There's no way he couldn't now. Not after all these tears we've shed. The soldiers will come and they will be blinded by the sheer power of our pain, and they won't be able to do a thing. Life will continue here as normal. I just know it. Rabbi Shlomo studied his son, an odd discomfort rising within him. On the one hand, his son's words were a reflection of everything he and the rest of the anti-disengagement movement had been prophesying and preaching, and everything he wanted to believe. There seemed to be an unspoken agreement among the settler leadership that planning for the disengagement to actually happen meant admitting defeat. On the other hand, was it really the best course of action to deny what Rabbi Shlomo had to admit was the most likely outcome? Shouldn't they at least be emotionally prepared for the possibility that the following day the sun would set on an empty Neve Kalim, and that 3 days later the soldiers would appear on their own doorsteps? Rabbi Shlomo looked into his son's eyes, dazzled at the light he saw in them. The hope emanating from his son's face seemed to lift him out of the black hole of despair he had sunk into the previous night. He imagined extinguishing that hope and realized that he would rather lose his other leg. So what we see here is two kind of different approaches to dealing with unpleasant realities with kids. First, we have Olga, who feels paralyzed in the face of this reality. And this is something that I feel really strongly and really connect to. I remember that feeling. The first time rockets started being fired from Gaza to this area, that was before Iron Dome was deployed. And I just have this memory of sitting in the corner of the room, holding my children who were scared and not knowing what to say to them. Like, I can't promise you things are going to be okay. And that's such a terrible feeling as a parent. And so, on some level, I kind of understand Rabbi Shlomo's response here to like not extinguish his son's hope. On the other hand, I think it was a bit of a mistake on the part of at least what I saw from the settler leadership and the community as a whole to approach it like that. I think that approach made it impossible for people to actually prepare for the possibility that the event would happen. Unfortunately, many people experienced major crises of faith, not only with religion, but also with their community, with the state, with everything. Finally, the wheels of the plane touched the ground. The passengers burst into an uproar of applause, cheering, singing, and clapping. "We are proud and honored to be the first to welcome you all home to Israel," said the captain over the loudspeaker. We're here, Daniel squealed, and Shelley squeezed Reuben's hand. Her eyes were watery again. The flight crew joined in an emotional rendition of Hatikva as the plane taxied toward the gate. The new Olim pulled out the Israeli flags that had been passed out at JFK, gathered their belongings, and filed toward the door. Reuben felt a blast of hot, humid air as he neared the entrance and stepped out into the brilliant sun. He shuffled down the stairs, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the light, and felt himself trembling as he drew closer to the ground. When his feet finally connected with the land his ancestors dreamed of for 2,000 years, he dropped to his knees, bent down, and kissed the ground. Eyes filling with tears, he turned to Shelley, who was carrying Shira on her hip, and Daniel, as they stepped down onto the tarmac themselves. "Welcome home, Shelley," said Reuben in a choked voice. Welcome home, welcome home!" Shelley threw her free arm around Reuben, and Daniel rushed in to join the family hug, and Shelley's rolling laugh carried over the hubbub of the crowd. Reuben sat in the parked car, staring dismally at the front door for a good few minutes before stepping out. He heard the yelling and crying before he even got to the steps. He knew what he would find: toys everywhere, a spaghetti-encrusted kitchen floor, his hyperactive 7-year-old streaking through the house in his underwear, the 2-year-old throwing a tantrum someplace, and his wife, her hair frizzy from the humidity and eyes dark-rimmed and empty, sitting listlessly on the couch, too depressed to care. This picture hadn't been on the Nefesh B'Nefesh pamphlet, that's for sure. Finally, with a huge sigh of relief, Reuben sank into his easy chair and closed his eyes, reveling in the silence. Not 20 seconds passed before the phone rang. His mother started chattering about this and that, about the multi-million-dollar deal his brother had just signed, about the latest gadget his father was excited about the Red Sox game she'd taken his sister's kids to, about the gossip from Reuben's aunts. He went back to his chair and sat down, the phone tucked between his ear and his shoulder, trying to throw in the occasional grunt to assure her he was still there. As the conversation came to a close, she asked him, for the 10 millionth time, if he was sure he had made the right decision. And for the 10 millionth time, he firmly lied that yes, he was sure. Very different tones in those two chapters, and the thing about them is that I don't think one is more true than the other. The real question of the book is, what does it mean to have a home? What does it mean to lose a home? What does it mean to find a home? That is a question I have been dealing with ever since my family made Aliyah, immigrated to Israel. I was about 2 months shy of 10 years old. When people ask me where I grew up, I don't know how to answer them. I think that's probably the narrative that's closest to my own experience. It's not really based on my experience, but it's closest to it. This juxtaposition of these two chapters shows this strange reality that is Aliyah and what makes it unique and different from many other immigrant experiences, which is that yes, it is leaving home, but it is also coming home, both at the same time in sometimes paradoxical ways. The USA is home to me in ways that Israel could never be. It is a place where my earliest childhood memories were formed, where my native tongue is spoken. It was where my ancestors have lived for 5 generations. It's a place where I feel comfortable in ways that I will never feel comfortable in Israel. And yet, on the other hand, Israel is also home in ways that the USA could definitely never be. It's the place where my religion is the majority religion. It is the place where I don't feel like I need to explain myself and my identity all the time, and where I can just feel comfortable being Jewish and being religious. It's the place where I can eat almost anywhere I want, and where my holidays are the national holidays, and my sort of ancestral identity is something that I share with most of the population. While it's true that 5 generations of ancestors in the United States, but like many more going much further back, my ancestors lived here. I am living that tension all the time. I think that the way that I relate to many of the dilemmas and difficulties that the characters in the book experience, I relate to because of that experience. So actually, the story that was hardest for me to write was this one, the one that was closest to my own experience. I don't know why that is. I actually had to rewrite a whole chapter because I just felt like I wasn't connecting to it enough. I'm not sure why that is. It's a question for my therapist, I guess. For me, writing is sort of like play, like how we play as children. I never stop talking to myself and talking to imaginary people. That is just how it is, and that's how I do it. That's kind of my process. Back at the beginning, like with the disengagement, I did not really identify with the settler movement. I was not a settler. I was religious, and I was living in the Merkaz in central Israel, and that was it. I also had preconceptions about who settlers were and what they were like, and kind of a little bit of a, I don't know if I really identify with those people. I think moving to that opposite side definitely helped me understand, first of all, that I had those preconceptions and maybe not so positive notions about who settlers were. And also, of course, to understand that there are many different kinds of people who live in these places. I think it's important to know that. And I'm grateful to have had that experience of getting to see my own bias. I, at first, did not think that I would write a story from the Arab perspective because I feel it is not my story to tell. It is not a story I really understand. I can't really represent it properly. But then this other story came to me and I wrote it, and it just sort of wrote itself. And then I had this story. And I thought, well, okay, if I have this story, I might as well make sure it represents, at least in some way, a reality that is familiar to the people who live in Gaza. My friend Abby is a peace activist and has a lot of contacts with people in the Palestinian community and in the Gaza community. She helped kind of connect me with some people who were able to give me some feedback on that story and some insight. And I think that that really helped me and I think enriched me as a person as well. Love you guys. Thanks so much.